Welcome to my performance narrative. Today I'm going to talk about a sport I have a lot of experience with. I have a lot of experience in competing in powerlifting and maxing out the three main lifts, squat, bench, and deadlift, as well as competing in any individual sport. I started in wrestling, and then when I got to college, I started to compete in powerlifting. I believe powerlifting stands out to me the most between these sports because I did it later in life. It allowed me to learn a lot more from the sport compared to when I was in high school and wrestling and in youth. This is also because I loved lifting so much more than wrestling, which made me a lot more dedicated to the sport of powerlifting. Wrestling was kind of more of like a forced thing for me. I hated cutting weight. I also didn't, as I did it longer and longer, it really I burned out in that as well as powerlifting, as I'll talk about here. Since I competed at powerlifting at a high level, it influenced me the most. I needed to learn how to balance the stresses of my life around my athletic schedule. However, wrestling taught me the skills I needed to become successful in powerlifting, which were dedication and sacrifices it takes to become highly successful in a sport, which then I implemented into powerlifting. Some things I learned mostly are time management, dedication without motivation, and how to combat burnout mostly, and creating that balance in my life, which I'm working on a lot now. I'll go over a quick timeline of how I got into powerlifting and the events that led to my eventual burnout in the sport. So firstly, I began powerlifting at Quartet Strength Institute in 7th grade. This was strength training specifically for wrestling. We focused on heavy compound lifts like squat, bench, and deadlift. And Quartet, the guy who ran the gym, really created a great environment for all the high school and youth athletes in the area. We all would go there after practice every week and all hang out and lift together, and that's why I fell in love with lifting overall. It also made me fall in love with the gym atmosphere and getting stronger in the big three lifts. I never missed a day lifting, even after long days in the wrestling room. I looked up to the trainer as he created this great community around lifting, and that's something I want to do now as well. But pretty soon after I graduated high school, I left to go to college, but I still had that drive to continue improving in the gym. Since I was no longer wrestling, that was my main focus in athletics. I started writing my own program since I was in a different state, so I no longer had a trainer, and I still never missed a day. I've probably put more time into lifting than I have into school the 3 years I've been here. It is kind of my safe haven. Pretty soon, as I was lifting in the rec center, I found other people who are really passionate about the gym and dedicated to it. One of those people was the president of the powerlifting team at the time, and that's someone I trained with for a very long time. The president set up a mock powerlifting meet at the ASU gym, and I unofficially set some Arizona lifting records, so I was really excited to start actually competing in the sport. Immediately after that competition, I signed up to get a coach for powerlifting. Since I didn't know specifically how to train to get stronger in those lifts, I just kind of knew how to train athletically. Immediately after that competition, I did get that coach, and right after that, I signed up to compete at nationals since I did qualify for that after that competition. But soon as I qualified, the COVID pandemic actually hit, which delayed the competition even further. But this was honestly a really good thing because it gave me a lot of time to practice and to put more time into training before I competed at nationals. But one thing was that all the gyms closed down. But even though all these gyms did close, me and the president of the powerlifting team took all the equipment we had and brought it to his house and put it in his garage. This is where I truly fell in love with the sport because over those 3 months we were in lockdown in Arizona, while everything else was on shutdown, me and him were having fun lifting in the Arizona heat in the summer. And we were in there every single week. And this is when I truly fell in love with the sport. This coincides with the self-determination theory, which is found on page 526 of the book. That theory states that if you have autonomy, competence, and relatedness, you're going to keep pursuing a sport, and you are going to avoid burnout. And that applied directly to me. I was autonomous because I really chose that I wanted to pursue this sport and competing. I was competent. I was already competing at a very high level, already qualified for nationals after my first competition. And next, I had a team and people and training partners around me that supported me and kept me going in the gym every day, and it's something to look forward to. So that's how the self-determination theory really got me into the sport, and that's why I fell in love with the sport. So since National got rescheduled and pushed to a later time, I was very confident going to the meet with all this extra training time I had, as well as working with a coach. I had a plan this time instead of just going to competition not knowing what was going to happen. And right after that event, I actually won nationals. The second competition I ever done, I won collegiate nationals for powerlifting. I was so proud. That was probably one of the coolest accomplishments I think I had at the time. I was very proud because all the struggles that occurred during the pandemic, I was able to come out and turn that into something positive. The next school year started up, and we all thought everything was going to go back to normal. But we got to school, and we were all online. So this gave me a lot of time to put in my training still. I wanted to keep pushing after nationals and keep getting stronger and stronger. But as I became more dedicated to sport, other areas of my life began to lack, socially, mentally, and physically, and school as well. This coincides with the cognitive affective stress model, which is on page 523 of the book. High demands can cause burnout, which is what the cognitive affective stress model states, such as high demands, needs to win, and eventually that leads to people deciding to withdraw from the sport. This applies to me since we were in the COVID pandemic, and one of my main focuses was my training in the sport. I started to lack socially. I kind of began to isolate myself. Mentally, I became very stressed, and I was actually unable to complete a lot of tasks. Physically, because of this stress, I was unable to recover from the gym, causing some injuries in my lower back and shoulders. And then eventually that led to burnout, where I took a break from the sport. But that will come at a later time in the explanation. But since we were still in this pandemic, I was still very focused, even all these things were happening. The next national competition came up around again, and I crushed it. I won for my second national competition, my sophomore year of college, and I actually passed everyone else's total by 100 kilos to win that competition. So I was, again, at the top of the sport, but this time I won, it didn't feel as good. I kind of lost my love for the sport. And that first win felt really good, but that second one, it actually didn't really bring anything to me. As everyone during that time was struggling with something, and it became more rudiment in my schedule, I began to isolate even further. I was no longer connecting with people outside of the sport, as well as other people around me weren't competing as much as I was, because they had other things they needed to attend to, but it was my main focus. This coincides with the unidimensional identity development theory, which is on page 525 of the book. My identity, which it states here, identity will be surrounded by the sport, which will eventually cause burnout, which is what occurred with me. I started to build my entire day around my lifting schedule, my eating schedule. I would avoid doing certain things because it would cause me to recover not as well. But my main focus was my squat, bench, and deadlift total, which actually, now that I think about it, I went a little off the deep end. But I was blind at the time to the burnout that was occurring, and I still kept pushing. During that summer, after that school year ended, after winning nationals, I was still pushing to compete again that summer. But eventually I decided to drop out as stress kept rising and rising. Soon after talking to other people, I decided it was time to take a break from the sport in powerlifting training. It was a very much needed break, and it actually provided me a lot of mental clarity on what was occurring, because I couldn't understand what was occurring in the moment, but now looking back on it, I know what was occurring and burnout happened, and now I know how to combat those things. So after taking a little bit off, I decided to sign up for my last meet, which will be nationals this year. I ramped up my training again, and I'll be competing in 3 weeks for my last national tournament. And after that, I'm going to give myself a lot of time to enjoy outside of the gym, as well as other training styles inside of the gym. That is my whole timeline of what has occurred in powerlifting and what caused burnout at the time. The main people who influenced my experience was Nick Cortad. He was the person who got me to fall in love with the gym originally, and that community surrounding the gym. And then Zach Schultz, who ran the powerlifting team when I got to college and passed it off to me eventually. And he helped me find powerlifting and trained with me for hours and hours and helped me fall in love with the sport. My triumphs in the sport were winning 2 national titles as well as hitting my lifetime goals for squat, bench, and deadlift, which was another reason I wanted to stop the sport, because I hit my lifetime goals. And then some struggles that occurred is that I accrued burnout over time. I started to struggle physically with injuries as well as mentally throughout the pandemic and because of the sport. And because of that, I've decided to discontinue the activity I did for a short period of time. And then after my competition in 3 weeks, I'll be no longer competing in powerlifting, and I'll be focusing on other areas of my life. That is the whole story. Thank you for listening.